Have you ever carried a dream so close to your heart, only to watch it slip into someone else's hands? Have you ever felt loved, yet somehow left waiting in the shadows? Rachel knew that feeling all too well. Her beauty was breathtaking, her love for Jacob undeniable, but her life was a tapestry woven with passion, jealousy, unanswered prayers, and a sorrow that would mark her forever. Jacob labored 14 long years just to call her his wife. Yet behind the romance lies a story far more gripping than a simple love triangle. It is the tale of a woman wrestling with the silence of heaven, the sting of envy, and the kind of longing that leaves scars on the soul. Her story isn't just about the past, it's about us. Because who among us hasn't wondered why God makes us wait, or why He seems to bless others first? Drop a 777 in the comments if you've ever been in a season of waiting, and if you believe that God's timing is still perfect. And to everyone who's supported our work through Super Thanks, thank you. From the bottom of our hearts. Stay with me, because what happened next in Rachel's life will take us from a quiet well in a foreign land into one of the most emotional and surprising chapters in all of Scripture. The shocking story of Rachel, Jacob's first love, and her painful wait on God. It all began in a quiet, sun-drenched valley far from the land Jacob once called home. The well there stood like a silent witness to countless meetings, its waters hidden beneath a massive stone, waiting for the moment its stillness would be disturbed. Jacob had just fled from Beersheba, his heart still pounding with the memory of his brother Esau's fury. Deception had marked his last days at home, and now exile was his only refuge. His mother, Rebekah, fearing for his life, had sent him to her family in Paddan Aram, not merely to escape danger, but to find a wife among their own kin. The journey was long, the roads barren, and the air heavy with dust that clung to his clothes and hair. Each step felt like a test. Was this the path God had chosen for him, or simply the path of a man running from the past? At last, weary and parched, Jacob's eyes caught sight of a wide, open field. There, under the lazy heat of the day, flocks of sheep rested beside a great stone-covered well. The scene might have seemed ordinary, yet Jacob sensed something unusual about it, almost as if the stillness was holding its breath. Approaching the shepherds, Jacob asked about their hometown. Their answer was brief, but enough to send a flicker of hope through his heart. "We are from Haran." Without hesitation, he pressed further. Did they know Laban, the son of Nahor? The shepherds exchanged knowing glances and replied, "Yes, we know him." And then, as though the timing had been divinely orchestrated, one of them gestured toward the horizon. "Look, here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." The thing is thrusting out her. Jacob looked up, and his gaze locked on her. The scriptures describe her in Genesis 29:17. Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. But beauty was not her only crown. She walked with a shepherd's stride, her movements purposeful, her gazes steady. Rachel was no delicate flower hidden away in a tent. She was a shepherdess, strong and capable, leading her flock through open fields under the blaze of the sun. How often do we overlook the quiet strength of those who carry heavy responsibilities without complaint? Something stirred in Jacob's heart. Without waiting for formal introductions or considering the customs of the place, he strode toward the well. The stone that usually demanded the strength of several men, he rolled it away by himself. A feat fueled not just by muscle, but by a rush of destiny. He drew water and tended Rachel's flock, each motion speaking louder than words. I will serve. I will care. I will protect. Then came a moment that startled even the shepherds watching nearby. Jacob kissed Rachel. It was not the kiss of passion, but one of overwhelming recognition, as if his heart had finally arrived where it was meant to be. His voice broke as tears streamed down his face. There, between the sheep and the stone, he told her who he was, the son of Rebekah, her father's sister. Rachel's eyes must have widened at the news. Without delay, she turned and ran toward home to tell her father. But what was running through her mind in that brief, breathless moment? Was it the strangeness of their meeting, the weight of divine timing, or a glimpse of a future she could not yet name? And what are the chances that such an encounter could happen at the exact moment two paths were destined to cross? When the news reached Laban, he did not wait inside for Jacob to arrive. He hurried out to meet him. His steps quickened over the rocky ground, and when he saw Jacob, his arms opened wide. He embraced him warmly, kissed him as family, and welcomed him into his household as though he had been gone for years rather than arriving for the first time. In those moments, the tension of Jacob's long journey began to ease. A roof over his head, a place at the table, and kinship. These were gifts worth more than gold to a man who had been wandering alone. Jacob settled into life at Laban's home, and for a month, he worked alongside the shepherds, tending flocks beneath the changing skies of Paddan Aram. Days began with the cool hush of dawn and ended under the deepening glow of the evening. And somewhere between sunrise and sunset, his gaze always seemed to find Rachel. Each passing day only deepened what had first ignited at the well. Love was no longer a sudden flame, it was now a steady fire that refused to fade. One day, Laban spoke openly. Just because you are my relative, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. The offer was generous, but Jacob's answer came without pause or bargaining. Genesis 29-18 records his words, I will work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter Rachel. There was no hesitation, no weighing of the cost. Love had already set the price in his heart. 7 years is a lifetime to some. Yet to Jacob, it was nothing in comparison to the treasure he sought. Verse 20 tells us, so Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. To labor under the sun, to bear the weight of long hours and endless tasks, and yet feel as though time itself was shortened. Only love can make such a thing possible. How many men in our time would give such years without complaint, without weariness, for the sake of one woman? For Rachel, these were days wrapped in promise. She was not only desired, she was cherished. She carried the joy of knowing she was the one chosen, the one a man would willingly exchange 7 years of his life to marry. In the quiet moments between her work with the sheep, she may have thought of the day that vow would be fulfilled. But as she moved through her routines, she could not see what shadows were already gathering at the edges of her future. For now, the picture was bright. Rachel, the beloved shepherdess, moving through her days with beauty, dignity, and the favor of being loved so deeply. Yet just beyond the horizon, unseen and unspoken, a deception was forming that would not only delay her joy, but pierce her heart. The story, for the moment, stood in sunlight, but every sunset carries with it the memory that night will come. The day Jacob had dreamed of for 7 long years had finally dawned. Every sunrise before this one had been a step closer. Every weary evening, a reminder that the waiting would one day end. He had endured blistering heat, bitter cold, and the endless rhythm of tending Laban's flocks. Yet never once did his love for Rachel fade. The words of Genesis 29:20 rang true over his life. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. To these not more meant Rachel, too, must have felt her heart quicken with anticipation. She was the one Jacob had chosen and fought for, not in battle, but in the quiet, relentless labor of a shepherd's life. The thought that she would soon be his bride must have carried her through countless days in the fields. This was their promised day, the moment when years of patience and devotion would at last be rewarded. Yet, even as the air filled with music and laughter, another plan was already in motion, one neither Rachel nor Jacob could have foreseen. Laban, the master of the household and keeper of tradition, saw the wedding not only as a union, but as an opportunity. His elder daughter Leah remained unmarried, and in their culture, it was expected, almost demanded, that the older daughter be given in marriage before the younger. But this was a truth Laban had never spoken to Jacob. Rather than face the matter openly, Laban wove deception into the fabric of the celebration. As night fell, shadows deepened, and the veil of custom concealed more than just a bride's face. The wine flowed, the torches flickered, and the voices of the guests blurred into the background. In that darkness, Laban led Leah to Jacob, veiled and silent, placing her in the role meant for Rachel. The night passed in the secrecy of the bridal chamber, and Jacob, unknowing, consummated the marriage. Outside, the world slept in peace, but inside, the truth lay hidden beneath layers of tradition and manipulation. Then came the morning, the moment when shadows give way to light. Genesis 29:25 delivers the shock with striking simplicity. When morning came, there was Leah. Finge Langspen Faro. What does a man feel when the dream he has waited for with unwavering devotion is replaced overnight by something entirely different? And how does a heart process the betrayal that strikes at the very center of its joy? That morning, Jacob's story turned sharply, and the path ahead would now demand more than just patience. It would demand endurance through heartbreak. Jacob's voice broke through the morning air, heavy with anger and disbelief. "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel. Didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" His words carried the sting of betrayal. 7 years of labor, 7 years of dreams, all seemingly stolen in a single night. For Rachel, the wound cut in a different way. The day that should have crowned her as a bride had instead unfolded as a public humiliation. How many had whispered behind the veils and garments, watching as her sister was led to the man who loved her? The joy she had carried for years was now tangled in a silence she could not break. What words could defend her? What action could undo what had been done? The man who had worked for her hand had awakened to find another in her place. Laban's reply came with the weight of cultural custom, yet it could not erase the bitterness of his deception. In Genesis 29:26, he said, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." Tradition was his shield, but it did not hide the fact that he had withheld this truth until the damage was done. Still, Laban was not finished. He offered a solution, but one that would cost Jacob dearly. "Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work." Well, Evan, it was a bargain born not of fairness, but of leverage. And Jacob, though wounded, agreed. The week passed under a strange mixture of festivity and tension, as Leah took her place as Jacob's wife, while Rachel remained in the shadows, waiting. Then, at last, Rachel was brought to him. The long-awaited moment had come, yet it arrived stripped of the purity it once promised. She was now his wife, but so was her sister. The joy of union had been joined by the bitterness of rivalry, and the love story that had begun beside a quiet well was now set upon a path of tension, jealousy, and the testing of hearts. From that day onward, Rachel's life would no longer be the simple, joyous path she had once envisioned. She was now a wife, but not the only one. Every day, she would have to share Jacob's presence, compete for his time, his attention, and ultimately, for the legacy he would leave behind. Jacob's heart belonged more to her than to Leah. Yet the scriptures record in Genesis 29:31, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren, with these of her. It was here that a different kind of waiting began, one far heavier than the 7 years Jacob had served. This was the waiting of a woman longing for the cry of her own child, yet facing the relentless silence of an empty womb. Rachel had been loved, chosen, and pursued with unshakable devotion. But now, she was childless, while Leah, her rival in marriage, bore sons in steady succession. Each new birth became more than a celebration in the household. It was also a fresh wound in Rachel's heart, a reminder of the blessing she had yet to receive. The ache grew with each passing season. She had Jacob's love, but love could not quiet the whisper of insecurity. The woman who had once walked with the confidence of being favored now found herself wrestling with feelings of being overlooked. Every lullaby Leah sang, every tiny hand grasping Leah's robe, deepened the shadow over Rachel's joy. Thus began a rivalry that was not merely between two women, but between hope and despair within Rachel's own soul. Though she was Jacob's first love, Leah was becoming the mother of a legacy, one son after another, shaping the future of Israel. Rachel, for all her beauty and the strength of her husband's devotion, still lacked the one thing she longed for most, the blessing of children. And in the quiet moments, perhaps she wondered how love and longing could live side by side without tearing her heart apart. From the outside, Rachel's life seemed flawless. She was adored by her husband, the very man who had labored 14 long years for the privilege of calling her his wife. She was beautiful, admired, and deeply cherished. To those looking in, she appeared to have won the greatest prize of all, a love so steadfast it had withstood years of waiting. But beneath the surface, Rachel carried a wound she could not hide from herself. In a world where a woman's honor, security, and even identity were often bound to her ability to bear children, she faced a silent and growing pain she could not conceive. Every month that passed was another reminder that the one blessing she longed for most remained out of reach. Meanwhile, her sister Leah, though unloved by Jacob, was blessed with a steady stream of sons. First came Reuben, his name meaning, "The Lord has seen my misery." Then Simeon, "The Lord heard that I am not loved." Next, Levi, "Now my husband will become attached to me." And then Judah, "This time I will praise the Lord." Each name was a living testimony of Leah's longing for her husband's affection. Yet for Rachel, each birth was also a fresh stab of grief. Every newborn cry in the household was another echo of her own emptiness. Her heart could no longer contain the weight of her longing. Genesis 30:1 tells us, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing children for Jacob, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children, or I'll die." These were not the words of a woman craving status or recognition. They were the raw, desperate cry of a soul convinced that without this blessing, life would lose its meaning. Jacob's reply cut sharply, not from lack of love, but from his own helplessness. In verse 2, he answered, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" It was the unvarnished truth. Jacob could labor for her hand, to protect her from harm, and love her with his whole heart, but he could not open her womb. That power belonged to God alone. And so, in the midst of love that had overcome years of waiting, a different kind of trial now began, one where the deepest desires of the heart could only be met by the one who had written her story from the start. But Rachel, like many before her in the pages of Scripture, decided she could no longer endure the waiting. The promises of God can feel distant when pain is close, and so she reached for a solution within her grasp. Following a common practice of her time, she presented her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate, saying, "Here is my maidservant Bilhah. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I too can build a family through her." Well, that's problem. In that moment, Rachel was not surrendering her longing. She was attempting to fulfill it by human means. Bilhah entered Jacob's tent, and soon a child's cry pierced the household air. It was a son, and Rachel named him Dan, meaning he has vindicated. To her, this was the first sign that her shame was lifting. Not long after, Bilhah bore a second son, and Rachel named him Naphtali, declaring, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." Her words carried the tone of victory, but beneath them lingered the shadow of rivalry. Had she truly won, or had the competition merely taken a new form? The heart that longs for peace rarely finds it in the midst of constant comparison. Leah, seeing her sister's tactic, refused to be outdone. She gave her own maidservant, Zilpah, to Jacob. Soon, 2 more sons entered the growing family, Gad. "Good fortune has come," and Asher, "How happy I am." The household, once quiet, now echoed with the laughter and footsteps of children. Yet Rachel's arms remained empty. Then came an unexpected twist. Leah herself, who had already borne several sons, began to conceive again. First came Issachar, then Zebulun, and at last, a daughter named Dinah. Each birth was another reminder to Rachel that, though surrounded by life, she still carried the ache of barrenness. The rivalry that had begun in whispers had now become an unspoken war, a contest written not on parchment, but in the births and names of children. And in that struggle, Rachel's heart still waited for the one thing: no servant, no strategy, and no human effort could guarantee the child who would be hers. The tension between Rachel and Leah ran far deeper than the number of children in their arms. It was a struggle over identity. From the day she first appeared at the well, Rachel had been known as the beautiful one, the beloved, the woman Jacob's heart had chosen without hesitation. Yet now, in the unrelenting march of years, that image began to crack. Leah, less loved, less desired, was the one whose sons were shaping the future of Jacob's household. Every birth in Leah's tent was like another stone laid into the foundation of the family legacy. A legacy Rachel longed to claim for herself. And yet, through all her emptiness, she remained the treasure of Jacob's heart. Scripture does not hide this truth, it repeats it, as though to remind us that love and loss can exist side by side. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, but love, as deep as is, could not fill the void left by her barrenness. Then, after years of longing, tears, and the bitter taste of being left behind, God moved. Genesis 30-22 becomes a hinge on which Rachel's entire story turns. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. Rabbi, those words are both tender and mighty. God remembered does not mean he had once forgotten. It means his moment had come. Every unanswered prayer, every silent night, every ache of her heart had been carried in his sight until the appointed time. And now, in a single divine decision, the season of waiting ended. Rachel conceived, and her body carried the promise she had yearned for. When her son was born, she named him Joseph, saying, as Genesis 30-23 records, God has taken away my disgrace. Atlantic docket, the shame had clung to her for years, like a shadow that refused to leave silent, yet cutting deep with every reminder of what she did not have. It mocked her in the cries of other women's children. In the celebrations, she could not join without a hollow ache in her chest. It followed her into the quiet of the night, whispering that she was incomplete, unworthy, forgotten. But in that sacred moment, all of it shattered. Her arms, once empty, now cradled the warmth and weight of her own child. The tears that fell were no longer only of sorrow, they were the release of years of hidden anguish, pouring out in gratitude. She could feel his small breaths against her skin, to hear the tiny sound of life she had prayed for with every fiber of her being. Her heart, so often clouded by jealousy and pierced by grief, was now filled with something new, pure joy. The heaviness that had bent her spirit for so long was gone, replaced by the lightness of answered prayer. This was more than a child in her arms. It was living proof that God had heard her all along. Joseph was the end of her disgrace, but also the beginning of a new hope. In his first cry, Rachel could almost hear heaven declaring, "Your season of sorrow has ended." Joseph was more than a son. He was a sign of God's faithfulness. One day, he would rise to become a powerful leader, second only to Pharaoh, and would save nations from famine. But at his birth, he was simply a miracle to a mother who had nearly given up hope. Rachel's journey did not end with Joseph's birth. Though much of her life had been marked by rivalry and longing, she now stepped into a new chapter, one where God's hand was undeniably at work. The joy of holding her miracle son was still fresh when a shift began in the household. Jacob, her husband, turned his eyes toward the land of his fathers. In the days after Joseph's birth, Jacob approached Laban with a firm resolve. The years of service had been long, and his heart longed to return to his homeland, to the place where God had first promised to be with him. But Laban, ever shrewd, knew his own prosperity was tied to Jacob's presence. The flocks had multiplied, the herds had grown strong, and Laban recognized that blessing had followed this man of God. Reluctant to let him go, he pleaded for Jacob to remain. A complicated bargain was struck, livestock and wages woven into an arrangement that would benefit them both. Or so it seemed. Yet as seasons passed, Jacob's wealth and influence increased, and with it came the simmering tension between the two men. What had begun as mutual benefit now felt like a gathering storm. Then came the word from heaven. In Genesis 31:3, the Lord spoke clearly, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." It was a command and a promise in one. Jacob obeyed. Without announcing their plans to Laban, he gathered his household, his servants, his children, and Rachel. In secrecy, they prepared for the journey, hearts pounding with the urgency of departure. Yet in the midst of this obedience, Rachel made a choice that would stir controversy for centuries. Before leaving, she took her father's household, gods, small idols carved from wood or stone, believed in their culture to symbolize inheritance rights and offer protection. To Rachel, they may have represented security, a claim to what she believed she was owed, or perhaps a lingering tie to her father's house. Whatever her reason, the act would follow her into the next chapter of the journey, adding another layer of complexity to her story. When Laban discovered Jacob had fled, he gathered his men and gave chase. After days of pursuit, he overtook Jacob's caravan in the hill country. His accusations came swiftly. The household gods were missing, and he demanded their return. Jacob, unaware of what Rachel had done, stood his ground, confident of his innocence. He made a bold and fateful declaration: "Whoever is found with your gods shall not live." Lizette ate, unseen by her husband. Rachel was the very one who held them. The carved idols were hidden beneath the folds of the saddle on which she sat. When Laban entered her tent, she remained seated, explaining she could not rise because it was the way of women. The excuse, paired with cultural propriety, was enough to keep him from pressing further. Laban searched elsewhere, but the idols remained undiscovered, silent witnesses under her. Yet the consequences of that moment would linger. Some scholars suggest that Jacob's unknowing curse, spoken in righteousness but shadowed by ignorance, may have sealed the path toward her untimely death. Whether this was divine justice or the tragic outworking of words carelessly uttered, the shadow of it followed her from that day on. For now, though, Rachel's life moved forward. She traveled with her husband's love surrounding her, her precious son Joseph at her side, and the sense that God's favor still rested on her. But her heart had not settled with one child. Genesis 30:24 reveals her ongoing prayer: "May the Lord add to me another son." This was not mere wishfulness, it was a burning desire, a faith that the God who had opened her womb once could do so again. She was no longer the barren woman. She was the mother of Joseph, the boy destined to become Egypt's prince and the savior of nations. And yet, as her hope for another child grew, so did the unseen stakes. A second son would indeed come, but the path to his cry would be paved with pain. The joy of her first birth had erased years of shame. The joy of her second would come at the highest cost a mother could give. Rachel's final chapter began in hope, but would close in heartbreak. The miracle of Joseph's birth had not quenched her longing. If anything, it had deepened it. She had named him with expectation, declaring in Genesis 30:24, "May the Lord add to me another son." Her words were more than a name, they were a prayer etched into the very identity of her firstborn. The woman who had once wept in barrenness now carried a renewed fire in her heart. She dreamed of a second child, believing it would complete the joy God had begun. The years passed, and God continued to lead Jacob's household. They journeyed from Paddan Aram toward Bethel, carrying the weight of promises spoken generations earlier. The family moved as a caravan of covenant, each step a reminder that they were walking in the path laid out by God Himself. But somewhere along the road, between two destinations, Bethel and Ephrath, Rachel's prayer was answered in a way she could never have imagined. Genesis 35-16 records it plainly. Then they moved on from Bethel. While they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth and had great difficulty. This was no ordinary delivery. The pangs that gripped her body were fierce, relentless. The road beneath them was uneven, the journey exhausting. And now her labor began before they had even reached a place of rest. Every contraction was a wave that threatened to pull her under. The very gift she had prayed for was now the very trial that would test and ultimately end her life. Somewhere in the midst of her pain, perhaps Rachel remembered the words she had spoken years earlier. May the Lord add, she had asked for another son, and the Lord had answered. But this answer carried a cost she could not have foreseen, a cost paid in blood, breath, and the fading strength of her own life. Her strength ebbed with every passing moment. The journey, the labor, the unrelenting waves of pain had pushed her beyond the edge of endurance. As she fought for breath, the midwife bent close, her voice urgent yet tender. In an attempt to lift Rachel's spirit, she spoke the words recorded in Genesis 35:17. Don't be afraid, for you have another son. Well, but the comfort came too late. The joy of new life could not undo the reality. Pressing in Rachel's life was slipping away. Her vision dimmed, her body weakened, yet her spirit clung to one final act. Summoning the last of her strength, she gave her son a name, Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. It was a name wrapped in grief, a cry of a mother who knew she would never see her child grow, never feel his hand in hers again. The name captured the weight of her last breath, the echo of her suffering on that lonely stretch of road. Jacob, though shattered by the loss, could not let his son's life be forever marked by death's shadow. In an act of love, remembrance, and hope, he gave the boy a new name, Benjamin, son of my right hand. It was a declaration that even in the ashes of sorrow, there could be a legacy of strength and honor. Genesis 35-19 records the moment with solemn simplicity. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is, Bethlehem, far from the familiar hills of her girlhood. She was laid to rest along the road, her journey ending in the very place where her son's life began. Jacob did not leave her passing unmarked. He set a pillar over her tomb, a monument of stone that spoke without words. It stood for generations as a silent witness to the love he had borne her, the years he had labored for her, and the price she had paid in giving life. Travelers who passed that way would see it and remember, here lies Rachel, the beloved, the beautiful, the mother whose story was written in both joy and sorrow, though Rachel did not live to see it. The sons she bore in joy and in sorrow would go on to shape the very destiny of Israel. Joseph, the child of her long-awaited miracle, would one day rise from the shadows of betrayal and slavery to stand at the right hand of Pharaoh. Through divine wisdom, he would store grain in years of plenty and distribute it in years of famine, preserving not only Egypt but the surrounding nations, and most importantly, his own family from starvation. Benjamin, the son born in the valley of her final breath, would become the father of a tribe known for its fierce warriors. From his descendants, would come King Saul, the first to wear Israel's crown, a man whose reign would mark the beginning of the monarchy. But Rachel's legacy was more than lineage. It was a name woven into the prophetic memory of Israel. Centuries after her death, the prophet Jeremiah would write words heavy with lament. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel, weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. Jeremiah 31-15. Her cry was not just for Joseph and Benjamin, but for all the sons and daughters of her people who would suffer loss. Her voice became the symbol of every mother's grief, echoing across time. And in the days of Herod, that prophecy would pierce history again. When innocent children were slaughtered in Bethlehem at the news of a newborn king of the Jews, it was as if Rachel's spirit wept anew, her sorrow becoming the sorrow of all Israelite mothers whose arms were left empty. Rachel's story, etched in both joy and pain, became more than the tale of one woman. It became the heart cry of a nation, a reminder that even in the deepest mourning, God's promises endure. Rachel's story does not close in ease, but in eternal impact. Her life was a tapestry woven with love, longing, rivalry, and pain, but also with promise. She was the beloved wife, the shepherdess turned mother, the woman remembered by God. And though her journey ended on the road to Bethlehem, her legacy endured in Joseph, in Benjamin, and in the unshakable hope of a people still longing for redemption. Hers was never a simple life. She was the beautiful shepherdess whose presence at a well forever changed Jacob's path. She was the cherished wife for whom a man labored 14 years. She was the woman who endured the silent agony of barrenness while her sister's tent was filled with the sound of newborn cries. In every season, her story bore the marks of deep longing, bitter rivalry, and moments when heaven itself intervened. Yet, through all her waiting, Rachel was never overlooked by the one who matters most. God heard her prayers, saw her tears, and in his time, opened her womb. He gave her Joseph, the savior of nations, and Benjamin, whose descendants would help shape Israel's future. These sons were more than children. They were living proof that God's promises do not expire in the wilderness of delay. Even in death, Rachel's name was not silenced. It became a prophetic symbol, a voice crying out in Ramah, a voice of motherly sorrow and unyielding love, echoing through generations as both a lament and a sign of hope. Rachel's life reminds us that even when the world passes us by, even when the weight of delay feels unending, God remembers. His timing may defy our expectations, but his purpose never falters. In her story, we see the power of love to endure, the ache of waiting to refine, and the sacred truth that legacy is often born in the tension between sorrow and promise. Rachel's story may have unfolded thousands of years ago, but its echo is still alive today. It is the story of a woman who knew both the sweetness of being deeply loved and the sting of waiting far longer than her heart could bear. She tasted victory, endured rivalry, wept in hidden places, and experienced God's timing in ways she could not have scripted. Her journey teaches us that God's delays are not his denials, and that the prayers we think have been forgotten may, in fact, be growing roots beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect season to bloom. In our own lives, we too face seasons of longing. We wait for answers, for breakthroughs, for the moment when the barren places in our hearts will finally bring forth life. And in those moments, Rachel reminds us, God remembers. Not because we are perfect, not because we have earned it, but because His love never forgets a name or a prayer whispered through tears. I believe her life challenges us to hold on, to keep praying, keep trusting, and keep walking even when the road feels endless. The wait may shape you in ways the answer never could. And when the answer comes, it will be more than you imagined. It will be part of a bigger story that reaches beyond you. If this story has stirred something in your heart, help it reach others. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss the next powerful Bible story told like never before. And let's talk in the comments what part of Rachel's journey spoke to you most. Your words might be the encouragement someone else is praying for right now. Thank you, dear friends, for walking this road with me through the joy, the tears, and the faith of Rachel's story. Every time you watch, like, share, comment, or subscribe, you're not just supporting this channel, you're helping breathe life into these ancient truths so they can reach hearts that may be weary, searching, or on the edge of giving up. Your presence here is a blessing, and your encouragement is a reminder that God still gathers His people even through a simple story told across a screen. From my heart to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. May the God who remembered Rachel also remind you today, you are seen, you are loved, and you are never forgotten.